观众朋友们，大家好！您现在正在收看的是由新西兰天维网正在为您独家送上的天维直播间系列节目之天维大咖秀，我是主持人志鹏。天维大咖秀呢是新西兰天维网旗下天维直播间系列节目的王牌节目。那么每期节目呢，我们都会为您邀请到本地政要以及商业翘楚，就您所关注的问题进行深入的探讨与解读。那在今天的节目当中呢，我们非常荣幸的邀请到了新西兰优先党的内阁部长 Shane 来到我们的节目当中做客。我们新西兰天网呢，就一系列的大家感兴趣的问题，对Shane 先生进行了一个专访。那么 Shane 呢是优先党的内阁部长，他在优先党内排名第4位，曾经在海伦克拉克政府时期担任过工党的建筑部长，目前呢担任新西兰的林业部长、基础设施部长、区域经济发展部长、副财长、国有企业部副部长以及交通部副部长，同时他还是优先党在北地 Northland 的候选人。好了，我们闲话少说，接下来的时间我们就一起来跟Shane 先生聊一聊。
So the program will be released on next week. So give us some time to the cutting of the videos. Anyway, so shall we start?
No problem.
OK， 大鹏好了吗？大鹏可以了吗？
好了。
OK。
没问题。
没问题。Good. So welcome, Minister Honourable Shane Jones. Minister Jones is the Minister for Provincial Growth Fund, for Forestry, Infrastructure, a lot of portfolios. First of all, would you please introduce to our Chinese audience who may not be quite familiar with you?
My name is Shane Jones. I belong to the New Zealand First Party. I am a minister, infrastructure, development, forestry, associate finance minister. I have a long background in business, in particular the fishing business, before I became a politician. My specific interests are in commerce, industry, and because I am a mix of European and Maori, I am very keen to see Maori culture, Maori development accelerated.
那我做一下大概的解释哈。今天我们在这个直播间呢，请来的是我们这个优先党的部长Shane Jones。Shane Jones 呢，其实他是有挺深的这个商业方面的背景。那么他在现任的这个政府当中呢，也担任了很多的比较重要的职位，比如说像基础设施部长、林业部长、交通就是经济发展，就是区域经济发展部长，很多的职位。同时他还是就是副财长，所以呢，有关就是这个财务方面的，就是政府财务方面的事务呢，他也是有一些负责的。然后他因为是毛利裔，所以他对这个毛利经济的发展呢也是非常的关心的。好了，我们进入下一个问题哈。So I will raise the questions raised by our audience. So from the most interested questions from our audience is probably immigration. So we didn't see New Zealand First Party put up a immigration policy this year. So what is your party's immigration policy this year, and what is the priority in the immigration agenda should the New Zealand First be elected to the next government?
The New Zealand First Party has always had an immigration policy where we want to attract people who can create value in New Zealand. We have always been very worried that too many migrants have come to New Zealand without the necessary skills or without the necessary capital, and they've ended up taking jobs that should really go to Kiwis. So I used to be the immigration minister in the days of Helen Clark, and I've had a long experience through the fishing industry of enabling foreign workers to come to New Zealand. So I thoroughly understand that migration is important from an economic perspective, but at the same time, it's really important that we address the concerns that pertain to Kiwis and ensuring that Kiwis are at the front of the queue. It may be said that Kiwis don't want to do the jobs any longer, which is why we need a flow of migrant labour. I think it has to be balanced. So our party is not hostile to immigration, but it has to be immigration that suits the New Zealand community and the New Zealand economy, not just a small group of New Zealand employers.
OK， 好的，那刚才我问的问题呢，就是问这个 Shane Jones 我们的这个就是优先党的移民政策，因为大家可能对移民政策都是非常的关心。那么今年大选呢，也是其实不少政党呢没有提出一个特别明确的移民政策。那么我就问他说，优先党的这个移民政策是什么样子？今年大选的时候，那他就表示说呢，说他们优先党其实有一个最基本的这个移民的政策的方案，就是说不希望，就他们认为就是移民是一个能够对新西兰经济做出贡献的这么一个角色，但是他们也不希望说没有技术没有资金的移民呢会去抢占新西兰本地人的一些工作。当然也提到说，有人提到说，确实是可能有一些人觉得本地人可能有一些工作不想做，那么不喜欢做，那么需要移民来承担，所以他就觉得说也是需要去当中取得一个平衡，就是说怎么把本地人的工作保住，同时也能够吸引就是移民。然后呢，他的观点就是说，新西兰吸引移民呢是要就是符合新西兰整个国家的利益，而不是说为了某一些雇主的这个利益去服务。Okay, Minister Jones, next question is about the Provincial Growth Fund. There are critics about the Provincial Growth Fund, and also the National Party is saying that if they were elected, they will kind of scrap the Provincial Growth Fund. So my question is, so since the Provincial Growth Fund has been launched, how many jobs or how many economic opportunities has been created for our provincial regions?
The Provincial Growth Fund was created by our government in 2017. $1 billion per year dedicated to growing the provinces, especially fixing up the roads, the wharves, the railway, and building water storage so that the land is capable of creating more jobs and creating better crops, and we don't suffer from the drought. In New Zealand, we have a very troublesome attitude towards water. From my perspective, we need irrigation, we need water storage so that we can continue to grow our revenue. These are some things that the Provincial Growth Fund has undertaken. The number of jobs since it was created is 13,000. That has been confirmed by the independent economic consultants. And obviously, once the projects are developed, such as irrigation, many more jobs will flow in the future. I'm very proud to have led the $3 billion fund, and the vast majority of it has been dedicated and committed to enterprises in the provinces.
Do you think it is worth like $3 billion for 13,000 jobs, while the government COVID wage subsidy has saved like more jobs than this Provincial Growth Fund?
So when the Provincial Growth Fund spends money, it spends money so that investors can put their own money behind it. Can I give you an example? We're spending over $100 million to build a new port at Opotiki. That will create new industry, new investment, and we're spending 20 million to build the world's largest mussel farm. So the jobs that are created in the short term are necessary so you have the long-term infrastructure and then investors can follow up. Can I give you one further example? $200 million improving the rail between Auckland and Whangarei. That's really essential because that enables the provincial businesses to expand and create more jobs. So sadly, it is wrong to say that the Provincial Growth Fund success indicator is only 13,000 jobs. Infrastructure has to last for 50 years. Without the Provincial Growth Fund, the types of infrastructure I've just referred to would not have been built.
Thank you, Minister Jones. Yeah, I will do a bit of translation. 我做一下翻译啊，就是这个琼斯部长，我刚才问他的这个问题呢，就是关于这个地区发展基金因为就是新西兰在优先党和工党这个联合政府上台之后呢，提出了一个这个地区发展基金，那么去旨在发展除奥克兰以外的这些地区的一些基础设施。那么刚才我问的问题呢，就是说这个地区发展基金投入挺大的，但是大家对这个地区发展基金的争议比较多。问他就是说这个地区发展基金3年以来到底创造了多少个职位？那么琼斯部长他表示说呢，说创造了就是13000个职位呢，是可以确定的这样一个13000个工作，但是他觉得呢，不能仅仅用这个13000个工作来衡量他这个就是3年来这个30个亿的这样30个亿纽币的这样一个支出，因为呢，其中有很多的基础设施的建设，包括做了很多的就是道路以及水道水路以及这个铁路的这样一个建设，基础设施的这个建设呢是就是比较重要的。他举了一个例子，就是说他们在Portuguese就是斥资这个1个亿建了一个新的这个港口。那么这个港口呢，可以就是这个2个亿建了就是建一个这个mussel 的这个一个养殖场。那可以带动当地的经济。那么此外还有这个地区发展基金呢，还在奥克兰和方格雷之间呢建这个铁路。那么这个铁路呢，将来也会就是说创造更多的职位。Okay, Minister Jones, I just do a little bit translation, and also forestry on your portfolio that Minister of Forestry. So we've been talking about the 1 billion trees program last time when we talked last time. So how many trees have been planted since the program started? And what do you think is the program's meaning to the local business and environment? And also given the background that the FTA upgrade between China and New Zealand also added the new aspect of wood processing.
Have been very privileged to lead the billion tree strategy, planting 1 billion trees over 10 years. As the Minister of Forestry, I attended an international Chinese forestry event at Qingdao. And during that period of time, I invited the senior members of the forestry division of the Chinese government to come to New Zealand. I hosted them in New Zealand, and we have a cooperation agreement where we send some of our experts from forestry to work with the officials in the Chinese government. I personally facilitated and cooperated with the Chinese forestry company. Since I have been the minister, we have planted between the government and the private sector over 300 million trees. So we are well and truly on our way to achieve the target of 1 billion. In some areas in New Zealand, the focus is now on more indigenous native trees. But I am a pro-industry politician, and I am very strong in endeavouring to expand the number of pine trees of a commercial nature so that we get a better return on our land. The largest purchaser of our pine products and pine logs is now China. but it is something that the industry in New Zealand needs to be very, very careful about, that they don't put too many of their eggs, shall I say, in one basket. You have to diversify. But in fairness to China, they are the single largest purchaser of our forest produce, and they've played a big role in keeping the forestry sector active and rolling forward.
So 好，那刚才就是我也问了他关于这个林业的这个问题哈，就是因为新西兰跟中国呢在这个自贸协定升级的时候呢，就加了一项关于这个林产品的这样的一个出口的这样一个协定。那么这个自贸协定的升级呢，对于中国来说其实是对于新西兰来说其实是蛮重要的，因为新西兰大量的这个林业产品呢也都是出口给这个中国，而且最大的客户就是中国。所以说这个琼斯部长也就说呢，说这个就是这个来自中国的需求对于这个新西兰的这个植树计划也是就是有很大的帮助。那么他本人呢也是参加了一些就是活动，包括这个青岛的这样一个林业的一个合作的这么一些活动，那么都是在不断的向他提出的这个10亿棵树的这样一个就是经济发展目标的这样一个植树目标在不断的靠近。So we've already talked about the China market. So I would put forward this question about how do you think it is important that the Chinese market will be playing in recovering the New Zealand economy, except for the wood business?
Well, China is a giant, economically speaking, for New Zealand. China has an appetite for our wood resources. I have been encouraging China interests to invest in New Zealand with partners, either to grow the trees or to create manufacturing base. The anxiety, the worry, I'm told, for the Chinese investors is we are a very small market. However, Fenling, Chinese business, have spent several years trying to find a suitable location, and I hope that they are able to do it in Gisborne on the east coast of the North Island, because there's millions and millions and millions of cubic meters of timber in that part of New Zealand.
So you were talking about the timber industry. So how about besides the timber industry? How about the primary products exporting?
Oh yeah. Well, look, whether it's agriculture, horticulture, fisheries, New Zealand is a world leader at creating food. I believe New Zealand should deepen its investment and continue to attract overseas partners to expand our ability to create revenue out of food. And China, it's not the only market, but China is a giant market. Now, the challenge for New Zealand is how can we process and how can we create more value? And I'm a great believer from my days in the Maori fisheries. I'm a great believer in collaborating, working together. And the opportunity is there in forestry for Chinese investors, and it is a very simple process. That's the only type of land that foreigners can buy in a simple way is for forestry purposes. Foreigners, very hard now to buy houses, very hard to buy dairy land or farmland, but if you want to purchase land to create a forest, then it's not as difficult.
我做一下翻译啊 I will do a bit translation, then we will keep on the China topic. 我做一下翻译，就是刚才我也问了，就是说这个琼斯部长，那么他既然已经谈到了这个中国和新西兰之间的林业合作，那么就想问一下他这个中国市场对于新西兰的这个 在这个疫情之后呢，这个经济恢复会起到一个什么样的作用？那琼斯部长呢，还是因为他是主管林业的嘛，所以他还是比较就是着重谈了一下这个林业方面的一个合作机会。那么他也提出来呢，说现在因为外国人在新西兰买房或者说是买牧场都是一件比较难的事情，因为需要通过这个外国投资委员会的批准。但是如果你想来新西兰购买林地或者说购买地来建设森林的话呢，是相对来说是比较容易的。所以他认为呢，在这个方面呢，其实两个国家是有合作的机会的。另外呢，当然他也提出说，就是说这个新西兰本身自己的市场很小，所以呢，它的很多的这个食物或者说是农产品呢，本身新西兰本身市场是消化不了那么多的。那么中国市场又很大，所以其实这当中呢有很大的这个互补性，可以让可以很好的推动新西兰的这些产品出口，然后来保证这个新西兰的经济发展。So let's continue with the Chinese topic. So you according to the you also talk about the Maori because you are a Maori heritage. So what do you think could be done to facilitate a better understanding and a better collaboration between Maori and the Chinese community in New Zealand, and how do you think this collaboration or this better understanding could put new kind of impetus to whether the economic recovery or whether the
I know that many Maori delegations have visited China, and one way of improving the connection between Chinese and Maori is to find collaborative ways in respect of economic investment. But secondly, when the curriculum of the New Zealand education system is improved and the history since the Treaty of Waitangi is taught to all children at school in New Zealand, then I believe that more Chinese families and young Chinese will understand why the Maori people love their land so much, why the Maori people were the first inhabitants of this land, and why the Maori people are so proud and so tenacious, so staunch on protecting and keeping their culture alive, their land, their rights, the Treaty of Waitangi, because this is their birth country. They have no other country to go to.
好，那我做一下这个翻译哈，就是刚才我问这个 Minister Jones，就是说这个因为 Minister Jones 他是毛利裔的嘛，所以但是刚才我们谈到了很多，就是说跟中国的合作。那么我就问他说，这个因为新西兰的人口普查显示说，华人很快就会成为新西兰的一个最大的一个少数族裔。那么就是怎样去更好的让华人跟这个毛利人族裔之间进行更好的沟通，以及这样的一种沟通可以给我们的新西兰的社会带来一种什么样的推动作用？那么琼斯部长他就表示说呢，说这个新西兰的他们就觉得说新西兰的这个怀唐伊条约是一个非常重要的一个条约，那么他们认为应该在这个学校的课程当中呢，都去更好的去教授这个怀唐伊的这个条约。那么只有就是通过这样的互相这样的了解呢，可能大家会就是华人群众才会知道说为什么毛利人对于这个土地，其实我觉得毛利人可能跟这个华人有一点点相似，就是说他们对这个土地的这个热爱，或者说他们对土地的执着也是非常的深刻，而且因为可能就是说大家需要去了解这个怀唐伊的协定，这个毛利人作为新西兰最早的这个就是居住者，那么对于这个土地的他们是怎么在这里最先定居，以及他们就是跟后来的这个殖民者又是怎么样的一个互动，然后导致出他们现在这样一种对土地的一种热爱，或者说一种感情。那么这是琼斯部长给的这个回答哈。So we will move on to another question about economic recovery, because New Zealand economy is officially impression. So what do you think? What do you think is New Zealand First's economic plan for developing the economy after the COVID period?
The New Zealand First Party is deeply committed to growing our economy, not putting up taxes. We do not think this is the correct time for a tax cut. We believe that the way to overcome our problems is to rapidly grow the economy. We would like to see a handsome depreciation schedule that encourages investors and manufacturers to spend their own money. Secondly, we believe there are too many petty rules and regulations that slow down business in New Zealand. We support changing the Resource Management Act so that resource consents and permits can be issued a lot more quickly. We want to underwrite and fund marine farming and aquaculture. And we also do not want to see any more onerous, heavy, weighty regulations placed on the farming community. We would like to see them enjoy a 3-year cup of tea, a 3-year delay, so that onerous regulations can be stopped.
那刚才我问了，就是说，新西兰优先党他们对于新西兰经济恢复有一个什么样的方案？那么他就是琼斯部长就回答说呢，说新西兰优先党他既不支持在这个时候减税，也不支持在这个时候增税。那么他们认为呢，还是需要让经济自身去发展就是来走出这个困境。那么怎么让经济自身去发展走出这个困境呢？他就提出说，一个呢就是要减少这个很多的手续，减少很多的繁文缛节，因为他们觉得说，对于很多经济发展呢，就是尤其是对企业或者是对农场主，那么有太多的就是这些需要合规的东西需要去做，那么会影响到他们的这个生产力，所以呢，他们就觉得说要给这个农场一个这个喘息的机会，就不要让他们再有更多的这个去所谓的履行这个履行各种文件、各种繁文缛节的这么一个要求，让他们在接下来的3年呢休养生息。那么另外他还提出来说呢，就是说会采用加快折旧的办法就是让这个企业呢能够通过加快折旧的方法呢来就是获得更好的发展和盈利。Okay, so let's move on to the border restriction, because still the border restriction is a thing that many Chinese is concerned about. Is one also there are Chinese students who are trapped outside New Zealand who are not able to come back. So if New Zealand First is elected to the government, what is your plan to the international students who were not able to come back? And they were very anxious about their current status. So some people say that if you cannot bring them as quick as possible, then the momentum is just lost.
New Zealand First believes that we need to improve the quarantine arrangements at the border. It's important that the military remain involved. It's important that we create a process for the international students to re-engage with New Zealand education. So after the election, we want to work with the universities and other institutions to build a specific process and a solution, because tertiary education is so dependent on international students. Our party, though, does not want to see international students coming to New Zealand as a quick way to become a citizen or to become a resident. We want people to have genuine commitment to education and genuine commitment to our country. we are very nervous that some students are coming here, but they're really only working on the, perhaps they're working in orchards or they're working in other areas, and they're spending more time actually in the labour market and less time doing their university courses or their tertiary courses. Now, whilst it's important to respect the independence and the reputation of our universities, we also need to ensure that the international students don't represent a threat to our COVID health. And that's why we think that if we work with the universities, we can come up with a good solution.
So how about I will do the translation and then we'll keep on with this MIQ questions. So 我先做一下简单的翻译啊，就我刚才问这个琼斯部长，还是就是关于现在边境管控的问题，因为现在的这个新西兰边境呢，对管控造成很多的留学生也是滞留在外面，大家都很关心这个问题，留学生什么时候能够回来？那么琼斯部长他就提出来说呢，说新西兰优先党他们对于这个边境管控呢，他们认为是应该更加严格，应该让这个军队来全面就是继续全面的来介入这个边境的管控。同时呢，他们就是觉得就是说这个留学生呢，新西兰不能就是新西兰的这个留学产业呢，不能就是按照现在这样的一种方式呢继续下去，因为他们觉得说可能他们不想让这个留学产业变成就是很多人移民的一个快速的捷径。那么他提出来说呢，就是因为可能有一些学生他们来新西兰说是来读书，但是很多就有一些人吧，可能会在工作的时间会多于他们学习的时间。那么他们就觉得说可能这样的一种方式会影响到本地人的就业以及本地人的这个就业权利，所以他就觉得说可能这个留学产业呢是需要一定程度的这个重整。So continuing with this border restriction questions. So we are talking about travel bubbles with Right Honourable Mr. Peter saying that the trans-Tasman bubble will be kind of as more quicker than we could imagine. So possibly very soon. So when we are talking about countries who have controlled the COVID-19 pretty well, I think China has been weathering the COVID-19 pretty well, and the country is literally in the middle. The COVID-19 and also there is a vaccine. It's a vaccine coming. So is there a discussion or conversation over a traveling bubble with China, and especially if the vaccine is coming? Is it possible that people who have this vaccine back in China could be possibly allowed to come into New Zealand without quarantine?
Well, New Zealand and Australia are allies from many, many years. So the New Zealand government and the Australian government want to trial a bubble that does not damage our health status. Sadly, Melbourne, Victoria got very sick, so that stopped everything. And for a small country like New Zealand, it's important that we trial something and get confident we can make it work. Now, the extension of the bubble to Asia, America, or other countries will only depend on how successful the original bubble is between New Zealand and Australia, because there's so much learning to do, and obviously the government has spent so much money on COVID economic resilience. We do not want to make a mistake and have COVID come back again. It means we wasted all the money.
那我刚才问这个琼斯部长，我就说刚才新西兰政府也就有在谈这个旅行泡泡，就是所谓的 travel bubble。那么新西兰政府一直有在谈说跟澳洲的旅行泡泡。那其实现在中国的这个疫情控制也挺好的，他们有没有想过说可以跟中国组成一个旅行泡泡，或者说等到中国的疫苗出来之后，有没有可能说我们在中国接受疫苗，那么来新西兰就可以 用再隔离了。但是呢，这个琼斯部长就表示说呢，因为新西兰跟澳洲呢是在很早之前就一直都是一个联盟同盟的关系，所以关系比较密切。那么新西兰政府呢就首先提出来说要跟澳洲建旅行泡泡，但是呢因为墨尔本的疫情后来又加重，所以最后呢也就没有办法，就最后只能取消了，就是只能搁置了。但是呢，他就说，如果要把新西兰的这个旅行泡泡扩展到澳大利亚以外的亚洲啊，或者说是美洲，或者说是其他的国家的话呢，那可能就需要在基于这个澳新泡泡的之上，然后才可以再考虑跟其他国家的泡泡。因为他觉得说，只有先把澳新泡泡做好之后，然后从中吸取经验，肯定会需要有很多要学习的东西，有很多新的突发的新发事件。那么要把这些问题都解决之后呢，然后再去跟其他国家再去组建新的泡泡。那因为他就说，政府也是投入了很多的钱和资金的精力资源去维持我们现在的这样一个就是没有疫情的这样一个经济状态，那么也是不想说把这个之前的这些精力都荒废掉。Okay, we can continue with the next questions. And also talking about the restriction, because News Talk Debbie has told that there are 270 people from all around the world want to actually to come to New Zealand and to invest money. But do you think New Zealand First will support the isolation of them, that if isolation at the 5-star lodges, if they were required to meet their costs and that of police and minutes? I mean, do you think we should allow those who could bring capital and who could bring critical economic contribution to New Zealand to allow New Zealand first?
If economic migrants who are going to invest capital in New Zealand want to come to New Zealand, our government already has that policy. But the money has to go into economic sectors that are going to create jobs. If the money just stays in the bank, then nothing much changes, because money is so cheap now that banks have got lots of money. So investors from China who are wanting a quick way of coming to New Zealand, if they invest, they must invest in those sectors that will create jobs. Now, as I said, it's really up to we as a party, we think we can do better with our border management. And one option after the election is to look at different ways of quarantining people, and especially investors, but no one is allowed to come to New Zealand and make a risk for not so much the economy, for the community. But we would very much like to work with investors and perhaps even the Chinese community as to what types of solutions do they think that will work, such as with the international education.
那么刚才我问琼斯部长就说因为可能在经济复苏的时候，大家也很希望说，是不是有可能通过吸引外资，然后让这些愿意来新西兰投资的人，然后先来新西兰。那么琼斯部长觉得说呢，就是来新西兰投资呢的话呢，他们还是希望说能够给新西兰带来真正的就业的投资，而不是说只是把钱放在银行里面，那这样子其实对经济的发展是没有太大的意义的。So next question also is the China topic. New Zealand First seems not to like China that much, or is it just a wrong impression? And the word foreign interference seemed to arise over China with the insults even direct to local Chinese communities, especially at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. So, and also kind of pointing to media like Sky TV. So do you think that's fair? And If not, what will New Zealand first the party to do to correct these things locally?
Well, New Zealand is a small country, 5 million people. And the Chinese population has grown remarkably quickly in New Zealand. But New Zealand is very proud, especially the Maori people, of their origins, their culture. So I don't think it's fair that Chinese media should criticize New Zealand for standing up for our own independence. That's what New Zealand politicians are meant to do. Now, I have been to China many times from the 1990s. In fact, I first went to Hong Kong in 1978. Then I went to China in the 1980s. Then I went to China at least once or twice a year from the 1990s. And I have seen the rise in the Chinese population in New Zealand. And I thoroughly understand that they are anxious not to be subject to prejudice. But it's important they understand New Zealand is a proud nation. And we have our own traditions, we have our own sovereignty, we have our own culture. And when we're talking with China, we will often disagree. But if you have respect for each other, you can agree to disagree. Now, on the question of the security of information, the security of the internet, our government is always vigilant and very, very alert that we do not allow our system to be compromised. And I don't think it's fair to suggest that our government is only criticizing China. Sometimes we do things we don't agree with America. We don't even agree sometimes with Australia. So I would like to think that New Zealand is quite a polite, harmonious society, and the Chinese people, I believe, by and large, are very welcome here. I do not feel, however, that it's correct for New Zealand to have to button its lips. We are politicians, we are democracy, and we should be enabled all the time by the public to have our opinions.
那么我刚才也问他，就是问琼斯部长哈，就是说，因为可能有些优先党可能有的时候对中国的批评比较多，那是不是他们不喜欢中国呀？或者说你觉得就是说对本地华人的一些批评，或者说外国影响论来扯到这个本地的华人或者本地的媒体，那这个是不是正确的做法？那这个优先党又是怎样回应的？那他就觉得说呢，是新西兰是一个民主的社会，那么他们作为政客呢，有的时候就是需要去提出批评，那么你需要就是大家需要站在互相尊重的基础上，就是怎么说？虽然我不同意你的观点，但是我也会尊重你说话的这样一个权利哈。But for New Zealand, I mean the political navigation between China and the U.S., which the two countries is in conflict right now. The space for New Zealand to navigate is become smaller and smaller. Do you agree with that?
The tension between the direction of China and the direction of the United States, really, that depends on the leaders of those two countries. New Zealand has to find a course way forward that respects the fact that we are economically very reliant on China, but we have a long-term association as well with America. And I don't think New Zealand is alone in having to navigate this kind of stretch of uncertainty. And because New Zealand believes in the international rule of law, then I'm very confident that New Zealand will show the judgment, and we will show, although we are a young country, we are very respectful of the rights and rules of international law, and we respect also the sovereignty of other countries, because China is always saying that people should respect the sovereignty and the independence of China. So it's a similar situation with New Zealand. We feel very committed, and we feel very proud about our country.
那么刚才我也问了，就是说在中美两个大国之间呢，新西兰怎么这个平衡这个关系，怎么去操作这个就是跟两个大国之间的关系。那么琼斯部长也说了，就是说新西兰就是一方面它在市场上又很依赖中国，另一方面呢，他们跟美国的就是这个联盟的关系也是比较好，所以但是他是说，就是说新西兰一直都是一个就是遵守国际法，然后就是比较独立的这么一个国家，所以他也觉得说新西兰如果一直坚持自己的这样一种怎么说独立的外交政策的话呢，其实也没有什么可以担心的。So talking about this elections, the last night poll looks not very good for New Zealand first. So what do you and also which means the Northland electorate is very important for New Zealand First Party. So do you think you have this pressure on you, all the pressures on you that you have to take New Zealand First into the next government or into this election? Do you feel the pressure?
That's a very tricky question. But of course, all politicians, when they are seeking the support of the voters, there's always pressure. But in the seat of Northland, my leader, Winston Peters, was the winner in 2015. And I am working vigorously to boost the party's support up here and the voters' support for me personally. And COVID has made it quite difficult with the various COVID restrictions about the size of the crowd, people's uncertainty, and quite frankly, people are still quite fearful, especially senior citizen people, about the COVID effect or whether or not COVID is going to return to the community. So this has made it quite a tricky election for all of us. However, irrespective of what the polls say, it's important that we go out every day, ask people to vote for us, and show that we have a good track record. We've been a responsible government, and we deserve, in the face of the COVID uncertainty, to be given another 3 years of steady, dependable leadership.
So, what would you say to the Chinese voters? So, how do you convince the Chinese voters to vote for New Zealand First?
Yeah. New Zealand First is a pro-business, pro-industry, pro-enterprise party. If you are looking for a voice in government, because the Labour Party is very strong, the Labour Party does not have the same focus as New Zealand First on industry, business, commerce, and we are also very pragmatic. So buy yourselves some insurance. You have 2 ticks, and if you are in Auckland, if you only rely upon ACT will have no influence over the Labour Party. because ACT will be in opposition. And if you rely on the National Party, they cannot get enough support to form a government. If you vote for New Zealand First, then we will be in the middle of whoever the next government is formed.
好，那我刚才就是问这个琼斯部长，这个优先党的这个其实民调昨天显示的是低于5%的这个就是能够进入国会的这么一个门槛。那现在大家希望都寄托在他的，就他们党都寄托在他的这个 Northland 这个选区。那么就是问问他说他会不会有压力，说你新西兰优先党有没有就是怎么去拉华人的选票？那么他就说呢，其实因为疫情的影响，所以他们拉票在选区里面拉票其实还是影响比较大的。而且他还强调呢，就是说优先党是一个就是说支持商业发展、支持这个企业的这么一个政党。那么他还提出来一点呢，就是说希望选民呢去比较战略性的去投票，因为就是他就说工党很强，但是如果让工党单独执政的话呢，可能就是他们的这个关注点呢，可能跟新西兰优先党的关注点不一样。那么他也不忘了去贬低一下这个行动党和国家党啊，就说他们觉得华人如果单支持行动党或者国家党的话，可能是不够的。所以如果希望有人在政府当中能够支持他，就是怎么说的话呢，还是需要去投这个优先党，认为这个是拉票的事情。Okay, Minister. Thank you, Minister Jones. Thank you very much talking to you. Hopefully we can have a next chance. Don't leave like 3 years that long to have our interview. Hopefully we can have like a monthly or bi-monthly regular interview with you. That will be a better information channel for our Chinese audience. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.